Hi everyone, my name is James Choi, and I'm a partner at Allen. Today we have a great honor to have Dr. Anthony Chow with us to do an interview. Dr. Anthony Chow, among a lot of positions that he's held before, he's a former president of the Hong Kong Law Society, so it gives me great honor to be able to listen to Dr. Anthony Chow sharing his insights, experience, and views on a lot of things today. So, shall we start, Anthony?
Yes, thank you, James, and thank you for your kind words. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yes. Maybe we'll start with a sort of usual question of can you tell us a little bit about how did you find law, or how law found you?
Well, that's a very complicated question, James. I never set out to do law, really, although I sort of harbor a desire to become a lawyer, but I never thought I would ever become a lawyer. Long story, I think when I was a kid, my mother used to tell us stories from what been actually reported in the press, and one of her favorite subjects was legal cases, and she used to sort of harp on the brilliance of certain lawyers, and one that can immediately come to mind is a barrister called Patrick Yu Sok Siu, and he's quite a household name at the time. And so that really started my admiration for lawyers and the legal profession. But I never really thought about doing law for a number of reasons. Really have to go back to the 50s and the 60s when law was not really an available subject in Hong Kong. To read law, you've got to go to then England to do. It to a certain extent is the sort of part of my life that I try to forget. After Form 3, my parents sort of packed me off to England to study. Basically, we had quite a number of children in the family, and we took turns actually sort of going to England. And when I got there, as I said, I'd already made up my mind to do science, so my main subject was all science subjects: physics, chemistry, biology, maths, and all of that. So when it sort of came to applying to university, I didn't exactly know what to do, except I got stuck with those subjects. And now to tell you a little bit about what we were talking about. Football.
Yes.
So on my mind, you know, there's only one football team, Manchester United. So we didn't have any school counsellor, so I sort of read about what would be the best thing to do. And I discovered that the most lucrative career would be to become a dentist. So what I did was I applied to Manchester University to study dentistry.
I see.
And unfortunately, I got in. Why unfortunately? Because after I sort of started, I discovered it's not something that I like, although, you know, I could do it, but I didn't really like it. I didn't like it because when I started to really think about it, the thought of the prospect of looking into people's mouths for the rest of my life was just too much. And I became very, very miserable. It was not a very nice experience, but unfortunately, I bumped into a friend of mine. He was in the same boarding school as me, and he was about 3 or 4 years above me. and he was doing medicine. So we used to see each other a lot, going out for dinner at the weekends, and he sort of knew about my predicament. And he said, Anthony, 2 or 3 years in a person's life is nothing. So you can always sort of, he didn't say walk away, he'd always consider changing to what you like to do most. But then one day he told me that if your A-levels are good enough, what you can do is you can use your A-level to apply to the College of Law in London. Because in those days you can either do law through a degree course or through the College of Law, and you meet up doing what you call the PCLO together, and you take an examination, sort of a national examination. It was in the old system. So, believe it or not, I then subsequently plucked up the courage of applying. I got a place from the College of Law. I left Manchester because by then I'd already sort of slightly, got slightly tired with going to the matches every Saturday because there's a lot of hooliganism
Yes.
in football. So the experience of going to live football wasn't that nice. You get kicked about and all that. So I left Manchester and went to London, gave my father a call to say that I'm now in London about to start law. Of course he was shocked. Both my parents were shocked. But my mum was slightly more agreeable and said, well, let him sort of. And at the time, I think I'd become slightly more mature and knew that I wouldn't have another opportunity. That would be my last opportunity. You can't sort of go through life telling people that I've just changed to another, another subject or keep changing your career, whatever. So that's basically how I got into law.
After you graduated, completed your legal studies, you came back to Hong Kong subsequently. Can you share a little bit more about sort of that part?
Yeah, well, it was all by chance because by then I'd been in England for over 10 years, and I did my, not traineeship, it's called articles, with a London law firm, a Jewish law firm. It was at the time it was very difficult for foreign students, especially Chinese students, to get articles. But after a lot of searching, I got articles with a firm, and they train me well, they look after me well, and they expect me to stay on. But it was just by chance that I got an opening from a law firm, a newly set up law firm in Hong Kong called Baker McKenzie.
Okay.
It was funny because I'd applied a couple of years early, towards the end of my articles, when I saw this ad in London saying international law firm. There's a pretty new term to me because all the prestigious firms in London in those days were called city firms. And your dream is to get into one of these city firms. I was in the city, but not in a city firm. And so I wrote in and said they were looking for a shipping lawyer. So I can't do shipping, I can do the following. So of course, it's a proper place that they sort of dumped my application. But over a year later, I got a call and said, would you like to come for an interview? But apparently by then, Baker McKenzie is established for about 2 or 3 years in Hong Kong. And by then, they, apart from shipping lawyers, were looking for other lawyers. So according to the story that was told to me by a secretary, then they said the boss got the letter out of the drawer somewhere and said, why don't we interview this guy called London? So this is just simply by chance. And it came to me as a surprise, but by then I just got married in London, and my wife, who's also from Hong Kong, we sort of, she sort of went to England at a pretty tender age, and to her, England was basically the home. So when I told her about the offer, she said, "You're crazy, we're not going." But that's really, she was put to a test as to, as to how much a woman is prepared to do for a man. So after a few days, is that your life? That's actually said to me again later by another woman. That's your life, you want to do it. So I left within 2 weeks.
Wow.
And she stayed behind to sell the house and all that sort of thing.
Okay.
And she came back actually to join me about 4 months later, after she's finished her articles. So she's also a solicitor. And I joined Baker McKenzie, and she joined a firm called Wu Quan Lee and Low.
Yes.
So both of us sort of resettled in Hong Kong after a bit of twists and turns.
Yes. And I understand that, after that, you went off to set up your own firm. Another very big move.
Certainly, it was not a move that I wanted to make.
Okay.
But long story, another. By then, I've been in Baker McKenzie for about 3 years, and I wasn't very sure whether, in fact, is it sort of firm for me. But then the situation, I don't know whether I should be speaking my mind, but there's a fair bit of inequality there in the set. It's very clear that you've got the expat terms, even though you've got juniors or associates who are younger than you, but the treatment seems to be more favorable to the extent that there's a lot of disgruntled on the part of the local associates. So they stirred up something that is that we should all resign en masse. Okay. And I said, no, I'm not ready to go. I was actually the first lawyer to join, first Chinese solicitor to join Baker McKenzie. Although there were a few, who were studying PSL and all that. But then somehow they talked me into it, and I resigned, I said. And I went to sign a lease and to set up my own law firm, not knowing what I would be doing, but just live with another Baker McKenzie associate, okay, who also believed that something should be done, and he sort of joined me, okay, as well as. But then I signed a lease in July, August 1982, and I wish I'd never signed, because a few weeks later, I remember in September, Mrs. Margaret Thatcher went to Beijing. That's the famous sort of trip. Not only did she make the trip, she also tripped outside People's Hall. And that was the time when she announced that Hong Kong is going to go back to China. The market collapsed, total collapse. And I really regretted making the decision, because I thought there's no way I'm going to sort of survive the 3-year lease. Because if I fail to make it as a firm, at least I've got to see through 3 years. You wouldn't want to sort of default on your lease. Probably I'll be the first solicitor to sort of close the firm on account of non-payment of rent. So it was absolutely nail-biting to, at the time, cut the staff down to a minimum. I think I started off with eight people, search clerks, messengers, so on and so forth, so that essential. So this is how I started. So it was pretty horrible. But luckily I managed to sort of see things through after half a year, and I started to get files open. Files that would give me an income to really pay my rent, pay the staff. I've always managed to pay the staff, the rent, but never any drawing for myself. Until after about 7 months, I was able to have my first drawing. So that was a lot better than I anticipated, because I thought if I can't get through, well, I told my wife jokingly, you've got to sort of support me so that I can sort of repay all my debts. But it's turned out a lot more better than that.
I note that at the earlier part of your legal career in Hong Kong, you're less involved in the Hong Kong Law Society's affairs and so on. But I understand that in around the early 90s, certain incident brought you to a cross path with Hong Kong Law Society, and since then you become very, very involved.
Well, it was not intentional. Let's put it this way. Very simple, I couldn't afford the time. As young lawyers trying to sort of survive, keep the firm going on, all that, how could one actually sort of afford the time? So I would read about law society, I would read law society circulars, just to keep myself informed with what's happening in the legal profession and all that, try not to break rules, basically sort of to ensure that I never sort of get on the wrong side of the law society. But it was then, I think, so 10 years on, okay, if not more, things have settled, the firm is doing reasonably well, and one thing, of course, the Hong Kong legal profession or Hong Kong economy was driven basically by property. It's basically a property market that supports everything. And estate agents were bubbling, and we were getting convincing work in. But one of the things basically was you have to go back in those days to those days where estate agents were not regulated.
Okay.
So they were all over the place. They were not very, I'm afraid to say, not very ethical, getting rebate and all that. So one day I had a client walk in with his newly signed contract from the estate agency. But behind him was an estate agent. It was a young girl, actually, sitting in the same room. When I started to explain the terms of the preliminary agreement to my client, she was pretty rude, because it got to some sensitive point and she sort of chipped in and said, "Chow, if you're not careful, I'm going to take this client away from you."
Wow. Okay.
You know, don't start sort of making life difficult for me. Okay. And she was very rude. I got pretty angry, but that's not the first time, because estate agents were pretty unruly, let's put it this way, at the time. So I think either it was 1992 or 93 AGM. I thought enough is enough. Whilst in the Law Society, you read about, estate agents in the newspapers, but yet nothing seems to be done to improve the situation. So I remember then turning up at one AGM and put my hands up and said, what is the law going to do about estate agents? Okay, they are also sort of putting us into disrepute about rebate being given to lawyers to get work and all that. I said basically they're putting us, our name, the legal profession, in disrepute. And the complaint fell, I think, onto the ears of a past president called Donald Yap. He then, after a few weeks, got somebody to call me to say, basically, young man, if you feel so much about it, you should do something about it yourself. The Law Society just formed a committee called a Working Party on Estate Agents. Well, it's basically put your money where your mouth is. Come and join the Working Party. So there's nothing I could do but to join. That actually, a number of things sort of turned my life. And that's one of them. Then shortly after that, the government formed its own working party to consider legislation for regulating estate agents. So by that time, I already got onto the committee, and I can't remember who said, "Young man, the government has asked us to nominate a lawyer to sit on that, the working party on the regulation of estate agents." So I was sent on to that working party. Little did I know that that was the beginning of my public service life, because we completed then the study and it became legislation a few years down the road when the government said, "Mr. Chow, you were on the working party, so you know the background of the law very well, and we're now establishing something called the Estate Agent Authority, which you hear about." So I was drafted on to become one of the 4 first board members responsible for education, ethics. Basically, the first 500 questions, examination questions for estate agent were settled by me.
Wow.
And I would test myself after saying all the questions in case I get the question wrong. So, and also responsible for disciplinary proceedings. So all told, I think I sat on it for 9 years. But then during the time or after the time, the government sent me on to many other committees. I also never thought, a stupid complaint would. And then, of course, going back to the time, 2 years after I after joining the Working Party on Estate Agents, then Roderick Wu, the then, past president, Roderick Wu, then one day gave me a call and said, again, young man, we've got a seat in council, would you like to join? The first year I said no, because I think the firm needs me more than the Law Society. Yes. But then, for a certain reason, I agreed to join a year later, 1994, not knowing that less than 3 years down the road I'll become the president. That's amazing.
Yes. That actually leads me to the next question about the presidency, because it happened relatively quickly, and I read somewhere that at first the invitation came a bit of as a shock or a surprise, but at the end, in hindsight, we know that you said yes.
Yes. You've got to actually straight to yourself back to the time when there was quite a bit of anticipation about, Hong Kong going back to China and all that. And in 1996, past President Christopher Chan was elected the president. And everybody sort of expected him to to lead the profession, take the profession from one era to another, from the British colonial era to the new one country, two system era. But then I think shortly before the end of his first year, I think probably halfway through his first year, he got an offer from the judiciary to be appointed as a High Court judge. So that actually took all the seniors by surprise. I suppose I was not really a senior, I was not even semi-senior, but I was, I wouldn't describe myself as a senior council member, but having actually been on it since 94, sorry. And one day I got summoned into a little back room of the Law Society with the president sitting there. And two senior members, Herbert Choi and Vincent Lang, and they sat there and I sort of, God, what I've done wrong, are they about to sack me or something? So they said, we have a proposal. We're thinking of electing you to be the president of the Law Society at the next AGM, which is about 2 or 3 weeks before the handover. I look at them saying, you must be joking. I was slightly shaken, to say the least. And I said, thanks, but then I really have to consider. So by that time, I had merged my firm with my sister's firm. My sister and husband were running their own firm, and we merged in 1989. 7 years after I set up my own law firm, the family sort of merged back. So she became, or Peter, my brother-in-law, who set up their firm back in the 50s, was the senior partner. Then he passed away. My sister took up, they call her your younger sister, because everybody's trying to be nice to my sister who's slightly older than me, my younger sister. Yes. If you want anything from my sister, they go to my sister. How's your elder brother doing? and so my sister was really the senior partner of the firm, was basically running the show. So I went back to the firm and told her about this proposition that I'll be elected. I was told off. You're crazy. This is the second lady in my life that told me off. And she said, Peter's husband, he just strove off to become the president of the Law Society and let go and ex-go, leaving me to run the firm. You're going to do that to me again? You're crazy. So recalling history. So our firm had a sort of history of serving the legal profession. So basically the answer from her was no. And there's nothing I could do, but anyway, for the second time in my life, sort of the lady said the same to me, it's your life, okay? If you want to do it, do a good job, I'll support you. So I think it was about 2 or 3 days later, she walked into my room and said, I've discussed with the firm will support you, but make sure you do a good job and don't let us down, because it's the firm's reputation at risk. I think she was, never told, but I think she was more really concerned with the name Peter C. Wong, which is her husband's name, more than my reputation. So that was the beginning of so I never thought I would one day become the president, but well, there again. So as I say, life, you never sort of know what you expect from life. So that was the other turn. Coming back to Hong Kong was something I expected. Becoming this one as expected. Yes. Yes. So this is how I got to be the president.
It was a very turbulent time. Was there any objectives or goals that you set off to achieve when you take on the challenge of being a president of Hong Kong Law Society?
No. I tried to play back, all right. The first thing was a little project was left behind by my predecessor, Christopher Chan. There were previous talks about buying premises for a law society, because the law society had to move out the Swire House, scheduled for redevelopment. So my first project was basically to look for new premises for a law society. But one thing and another, to cut the long story short, you can ask a lot of my colleagues. I was lucky then enough, my first project was to find enough money to buy where we are now. And that was the beginning. Because I sort of then worked out that we were paying over $600,000 rent per month. I said if we could sort of save that, we would be able to save $8 million a year, and that could very well be used in the future for redevelopment. But then I was very brave to sort of when you're young, you're very brave. So I got the permission of the council to basically use up quite a large proportion of its reserve, and took that to pay for the deposit, and then the rest. Long story, but then the rest I managed to borrow a very large sum to buy the premises, and which I thought we'd never be able to repay anyway. But we repay, not realizing that the taking up of the regulation of foreign lawyers would give us an extra income that would allow us to pay off the mortgage and rest against history. My second goal was basically immediately after the handover, or just after the handover, the government abolished scale charge, coupled with 1998, the Asian economic downturn. So the whole legal profession was in a mess. So my goal was basically to open up new avenue for the legal profession. And the only thing that I could think of, was basically to go into China. But you had to go back to 1998. Just after the handover, I suggested going to China. I really got hit by the entire profession for submitting to China. But that was not my goal. My goal was nothing to do with politics. My goal was basically to open up a new market from China. But I didn't actually sort of manage to vindicate myself until about 6 or 8 years down the road, when all the foundations then became reality. So then people say, it was a good job then. But those few years with the right of the boat problems, with besides the Asian economic downturn, cutthroat and all that, I wouldn't want to go through that ever again.
Can you tell me a bit more about sort of the challenges or the work done during your presidency? Because I note that, again, it's less usual times again, when you were...
I think the two things.
Yes.
One thing is livelihood, as I said. The legal profession, I think the whole of Hong Kong was going through a really bad patch because of the Asian economic downturn, and especially for lawyers with the abolition of scale charge. So business was cutthroat, and so the first challenge is livelihood. How can you do certain things around, expand the base of practice for lawyers? So you sort of trying to retool them to do other things other than conveyancing. Getting into mediation now is a big practice, arbitration that nobody wanted to do, and all that litigation. So we've got to. But then the other challenge is the coming in of the foreign lawyers. The influx of that, the impact on the legal profession, cornering the market and all that. So the question is, how do you open up new markets for our own lawyers, and also dealing with the impact brought about by the economy and by the influx of lawyers. Anyway, long story, and that's why I think one could not just walk away after one's presidency, because there's a lot of things you have left behind. Like, then we form a new committee called the Mainland Legal Affairs Committee, basically to take on all the leftovers that you've started, and to develop from all the things that you've done. So I'm glad that this committee is now one of the strongest committees, one of the busiest committee of all the committees, because China is big, And after laying the foundation, my successor then the next year or so managed to sign, I think, 19 or 23 MOU with different cities. I mean, before that, we had to go to China and introduce ourselves. We're from the Law Society, and they said, "Who are you? Sorry, Law Society." So you could start from scratch, telling them I'm the sort of hybrid between the Ministry of Justice and the All China Lawyers Association. We are sort of in charge of regulation, which is really the job of the Ministry of Justice, and the union parts, which is really the All China Lawyers Association. We are both. Okay. So you get them to understand, get them to convince them that we are the association that you should be with. We can teach you how to manage your law firm, improve the quality of your lawyers. So by starting exchange program, the first one was with Chongqing. Get the lawyers to go to law firms. So you have got the law firms to take them, to train them for a month, and then to get law firms to volunteers to go back and join the law firms for 2 weeks. So that was the start. It's not easy to drum up support from, but I'm so glad that I had support from many firms to come forward to do the programs and to sort of rouse the atmosphere.
Yes.
To go into China.
That's been over 20 plus years. So what is your view now on the sort of the opportunities, or perhaps?
I think before that, we've got to drum up the opportunities, but the opportunities are now everywhere. So basically, sort of clients are now sort of crystallized into two groups: individual clients and corporate clients. So of course, there's a lot more money, with corporate, but law is about serving the people. So I think it's how you're going to strike the balance. I want to make sure that I do works which serve individuals. And that's where I derive my satisfaction, really. The way you sort of derive economic benefits, you go to the corporate. So sometimes how you position your law firm is also very important, I think a bit of intimacy with your clients is very important, but that is not something that you would often get from serving corporate clients. All they need to do is, they want to do is to basically make sure that this deal is done, and that's it, and they move on. I think with China, I think you get both as well, because individuals who migrate to Hong Kong would need individual services. All right, buy property, so on and so forth. But then they have their own corporations that you can also serve. So I think there's plenty of opportunity either but of course in the past, you've got to go in, what they call 走入去.
Yes.
But then now, of course, the 走出嚟 is also very important. So you've got to actually then think about how you're going to sort of try to benefit from both 走入去 and 走出嚟.
There's also another sort of a group that was set up. It's called the 豬朋狗友.
That's right.
But not that.
Let me sort of explain the background behind that, because towards the end of 1988, as I say, the workload of Law Society was really getting on to me. And Fred Khan, who was on the council, then said, "Anthony, you cannot sort of be so serious all the time. You should relax." And he says, "Do you play golf?" I said, "I don't." So he said, "All right, you should take a few lessons. I'll take you to play golf." And when he mentioned that, little did we know, quite a number of people in council were golfers. So they sort of came forward, and we started to form teams and started. So I had to then learn golf just to sort of to be able to be with them, because otherwise you're not a team. That's how I started. After a while, they said, "Anthony, are you a happier man now?" I said, "Yes, I am." He said, "There's a Chinese saying that those people who can make you happy are called 猪朋狗友." I said, "Wow, God, I cannot go back and tell my wife that I have a bunch of 猪朋狗友. She's going to kill me." All right. But jokingly, we started to call ourselves, this 猪朋狗友. And what actually tied us together was the breakfast meeting every Saturday.
Okay.
We used to work on Saturday, but we'd take it easy. But because there were so many council issues, so I said, and they were complaining about me having council meetings until 4 o'clock and all that. Wow. The big complaints from them. So what I did then was I said, in that case, we'll cut short and know exactly what I'll be talking about. Have breakfast meeting in a Chinese club at 8 o'clock every Saturday. And to say, God, we want to sleep. We don't want to have meeting every Saturday morning. But nonetheless, they turn up, and that became the core group of the 猪朋狗友. They're very nice, and every time everybody has to pay for their own share of the breakfast. And on top of that, I would say, "Give me $100. I said, "What's the $100 for?" I said, "It's for me to bet on the horses so that next week we don't have to pay for breakfast." And we never got a penny back. So said, "Anthony, this is your trick to get our money to pay to the jockey club." I said, "Yes." And that's how we cemented the 猪朋狗友 through the Saturday meetings, and became golf group and all that. But after that, we got to the stage that because of my involvement in Jockey Club, we should further support the Jockey Club, not just by paying for the $100. We should have a horse. But then we cannot call it 猪朋狗友 in case. So somebody learned said, 猪 can be 猪猴, 猪
Yes.
朋狗 to be 長狗狗. I said, "Oh, that's very good." Actually, by that time, we have already actually adopted an English name. We called us out, we didn't really want to say 猪朋狗友. It's a bit embarrassing, so we turned it into CPKY. Up till now, we still have this famous group of CPKY with the Y. Become very sort of something really affectionate for the wives as well. And the wife we brought the wife together, and they also form a group called 金蘭姊妹.
And just now you also mentioned about the Hong Kong Jockey Club, which you actually later become the chairman of the Hong Kong Jockey Club, among the many public positions that you've held.
It's again by chance. No, I'd always been interested in horses. So I think when I was a kid, as soon as my father became a member of the Jockey Club, and I was very curious. I was just a kid of perhaps 6, but the name. So he used to take me to the club and all that. I became extremely fond of the club. No, actually, extremely fond of horses and horse racing. Not crazy about, I was trying to learn everything about horse racing. My father was not too receptive to the idea of my liking horses, so he was trying to say no. But then, of course, the wrong move on his part was sending him to England, because so much horse racing there, as you know.
Yes.
So I became even more interested. Apart from racing, apart from riding, from breeding and all that sort of. I started collecting books on horse racing, and eventually got myself a little library on book on horses. Later, I can actually then show you a book. Probably there's only book which lies on my table. It's called The Horse and the Law, written by an Australian QC.
Oh.
But, yeah, I can choose that. That was basically sent to me by my colleagues from Baker McKenzie, who then discovered that behind the scene, I was always, attending horse racing, talked about nothing but breeding and all that sort of horses. And that then, of course, led me eventually to own a horse with a very good friend of mine that I grew up with, the son of my father's schoolmate, and we sort of promised each other that whenever we could afford, we should have our own horse. So true enough, I think 10 years after I had my own law firm, I thought I would have the sort of economic grounding to own a horse, and we started to own our first horse with the name Feelings, because splendid feeling. And since then we've had about, I think, 25 Feelings. And one thing and another, while I was the president of the Law Society and all that, I got dragged into become onto the board of the Racehorse Owners Association in Hong Kong. A bunch of owners, and from that, got drafted by the Jockey Club onto using my skills for legal skills for what you call the race day meetings and all that for proceedings and all that. And from then on to a few years later, I became a steward and on the board for 18 years, ending as the chairman. Yes.
There's another part, of your career that I'm very interested to know, is that the vast number of public positions that you hold. Some are quite legally related in the legal industry. The other is less legally related. I just want to learn a bit more.
Apart from the Jockey Club, actually they're all legally related. They're all to do with law or regulations. The reason why they need you because they want to make use of your legal skills. So it's more really all legally related if you really look at them. Yeah, I'd say. With the exception of my last one. When the government said, you want another one, I said, well, not if it is, regulatory related. So the last one was as the vice chairman of APA, Academy for Performing Arts, because I'm very much interested in performing arts myself, apart from the law and the horse. My wife said you're into everything. So I throughout my life, I've done a bit of singing for charity.
Wow.
For community chairs, so on and so forth, raising money. So I think it's a good thing if people ask you that you can actually. I think because I don't really have the money to donate. So what I do is I'll sing for people to donate. And so throughout my life, I have done a lot of that. And it's given me a lot of pleasure because I've then had the opportunity of singing with some of the famous singers to raise money, and if I may boast a little bit, my the largest donation which I got was for community chess on TV for $1.9 million.
Wow. Unfortunately, like time is
Yeah.
limited, and I just thought that instead of me asking you questions, I'm just wondering, is there like a usual life story that you like to tell, or is there some observations or insight that you would want to share with, you know, Hong Kong lawyers, if there's like one to share?
I think, well, the only thing I can think of right now that always come to mind is just be passionate about things.
Yes.
You know, whatever you do, just be passionate about it, and you'll be able to reap the reward. You know, that's what I have found in life. You know, I think that's all I can say. Just, if you're a lawyer, just be passionate about law. All right.
So thank you again, Anthony, for doing this interview with us. So as a token of appreciation, we've got a little souvenir for you. Hope you like it.
Okay. Thank you, Jay.
Welcome.